Welcome back to the Men We Are podcast. This is episode 13 in the series. I'm Kieran, and it's a pleasure to be guiding you through this journey of discovery about problems we as men tend to face and who we as men really are when we peel back the bravado and the false narratives that society douses us in. Previously, we talked about the difference between being needed versus being known, and how many men they in fact build an identity around their usefulness whilst feeling quietly unseen. And with a lot of these issues, this has led to a bigger question: where did we actually learn what love looks like? If some people say it's usefulness, some people say it's emotional interaction. Where did we learn what that love looks like? Because none of us sat down as an 8-year-old and said, right, love equals providing and feelings can stay quiet. I mean, as with most things, there may actually have been some 8-year-olds that had a stark life event, so that situation actually happened. But clearly, that would be the exception rather than the rule. So, where did we actually learn that love works like that? We absorbed it. And we absorbed it from the first relationship we ever witness, which for most of us tends to be our parents or whoever filled those roles of our guardians. Because the way love looks growing up becomes the blueprint we build from as adults. And psychologists call this attachment modeling. It is a very clear concept, and it was first explored by John Bowlby, and it's been expanded since, and it continues to be expanded through decades of attachment research. So nobody gave us a lesson, like sat down and said, this is what you have to do, A to B to C, on emotional intimacy. And I want to say that you won't find an idiot's guide to emotional intimacy in the bookshop, but actually there is a fairly good chance there is a book like that. But even if that were true, experience is substantially stronger in teaching you than any theory can be. So we learned through watching and experiencing, and we saw how disagreements happen, who apologized to who had to chew down and swallow their feelings, how stress was handled in the house, in the relationship. And sometimes we also saw how affection was shown, or perhaps how affection was avoided. So developmental psychology shows that children learn these relational behaviors through observational learning, which is exactly what we just said. It's stronger to learn by experience than by theory. And children don't analyze what's happening. They just adapt. They just see what's happening and they adapt. So your brain wasn't thinking, yes, that's an interesting communication pattern. Not at all. You're a child. It was thinking something closer to, this is normal. That's what life looks like. And by extension, they then say, this is what love looks like. So if love in your house growing up looked like silence, tension, emotional distance between the two partners, that didn't register with the child. It didn't register with the young you growing up as dysfunction. It just registered as normal. So in most homes, roles weren't just practical, they were emotional. It was where you fit into it. And you might have learned that men perhaps don't talk about their feelings, or men show their love by providing and servitude. Men handle their problems alone. And that is honestly 100% how I think about things sometimes in my upbringing. My father is he's an incredible man, so loving. He's really great. And he shows it in his way. He shows it in the way that he feels comfortable. He certainly doesn't get into chatting about feelings unprompted. And as an adult, I now know some of the problems and burdens he was facing when I was growing up that obviously I never knew about. And we've since talked about as adults, as men together. And the reason I say chatting about feelings unprompted is my father is such a calm and level-headed man. And some of the problems I've had in the last few months, about half a year, maybe even as far as a year, I sought his counsel on, and he was absolutely great. And sometimes, I warm up to the conversation, but there comes a point where I have to ask a more difficult question because I really want to get his insight. That conversation was completely instigated by me. And it was even something 2 years ago I certainly wouldn't have done. But I've learned from some other great people that I've interacted with that have taught me that, like everyone wants to get on the dance floor, but it takes someone to go first. I've done that in getting the conversations going. So I instigated the conversations, but obviously for my dad, his only options were to be part of the conversation or do a runner. So thankfully, he let me bend his ear off and he didn't run away. So family system psychologist Murray Bowen showed how emotional roles repeat across generations. So the threat for me is obviously I don't want to end up in this person that is a bit emotionally muted. But Murray Bowen called it intergenerational transmission of patterns, which makes perfect sense if you line the words up. So we didn't just learn about love, we learned who you are supposed to be within it. So, how much space you can take, which of your needs are welcome, whether conflict automatically means danger. You learned so much about the roles. And this was all at a time when you didn't actually have the language to understand and define what was happening because you're still a child. You're still in the formative years of your life. So I'm not sure I can really find a great example of a role I took on from childhood because I just can't remember. But certainly as a teenager, I know that I really stretched myself thin. I went to a fairly academic school, so our homework load could be high every evening. And I also really enjoyed playing sport. So I played rugby for school and club. I swam for school and club. I was also an air cadet. So on every single day of the week, I had something before school, something after school, potentially in the evening after that too. The weekends were full to bursting with swimming galas, rugby matches, both days, gliding mixed in with that. And I was doing too much. But I didn't want to be seen as a quitter or disappoint my parents that I wanted to take the easy life and get some time off, which I know now they wouldn't have batted an eyelid at. They probably would have congratulated me and patted me on the back for taking the more mature approach. So I took on this role of the silent worker. And I had my very clear schedules. And when something upset the tight schedule, instead of reaching out for help, I knew my parents had their own challenges. So I just dealt with things completely alone. Because by showing I could just get things done, I thought I was proving just how strong my intentions were, And sadly, I do still fall into that trap sometimes where I don't tell people the gravity of my problems, what I'm dealing with. I just tell them that I'm dealing with something. I'm dealing with it. And I'll let them know when it's all sorted. And people often want to help. They reach out. And I just tell them, no, it's okay. I can do it. Because it's kind of wired into me that way. And it's a difficult behavior for me to get my head out of. And I saw this first and foremost back in the autumn. And I was supposed to visit a friend in America. But I had totally cocked up my travel arrangements. So I was really scrambling to fix the problem. And I did say there was something wrong. But because all I could hear in my head was, come on, Kieran, figure this out and get it sorted. I was pretty vague with the details. All of my bandwidth was solve the problem. Don't worry about anything else. Instead of, instead keeping the role going of the one that just gets things sorted and doesn't burden others with their problems. So there they were, of the opinion that I was just angling to cancel my trip, that I wasn't going, that I didn't really want to be there, when my efforts were the absolute polar opposite. And they even went as far as to go on ChatGPT to prove that what I told them wasn't correct, which then required me to send screenshots and stuff back to prove that what I was saying was true. Oh, Christ. Like, I made life so difficult for myself. But if I had just shared everything I was dealing with from the outset, even though I was actually the only one that could sort it, at least I would have removed the ambiguity and they would have had the full story. And I would have felt like I had support, instead of what actually happened, which I was putting out a big fire and then having to put out other little fires around it, albeit small. But it was just, I was absolutely bubbling with stress at that stage. So hopefully that little story gives you a bit of context there. So there is an uncomfortable truth to this concept of learned behavior, in that we don't date people, we date what's familiar. So we don't tend to fall in love with what's healthy. Sometimes we fall in love with what is familiar. Now, this is a very loose correlation, but this can be why sometimes you get these girls, women that had daddy issues growing up, and then the guys they date, maybe some of the mannerisms and personalities are the same, but ultimately they're dating these bad boys that they know won't treat them well. And even though their relationship ends, the next guy is another bad guy. And they're questioning it as they have this conveyor belt of idiots. But they keep repeating the behavior because it's what's familiar. And attachment science shows our nervous system is absolutely magnetically drawn to relational dynamics that resemble early experiences, even if they're difficult. So your body asks, does this feel familiar? Does this feel like home? And even if that meant walking on eggshells, emotional distance, having to earn some attention, managing someone else's mood, whatever it was, a relationship can click, not because it's right, but because it's recognizable. And suddenly you're actually not in a new story. You're just replaying an old one with the characters having changed faces. So for me, it is a silly example. But I met someone when I think I was about 16. I'd gone to visit my sister at university, and basically I fell in love with one of the girls in her dormitory. The first night I met her, obviously I didn't actually love her. I was an idiot. I was 16 years old. But what happened after that is every single girl I found physically attractive and was drawn to for a couple of years after that was basically a carbon copy of that girl. Same hair, figure, complexion, you name it, carbon copy. And obviously the familiarity ended when I got to know them because their personalities were different. But the power of familiarity, when I look back, it is laughable. And I think the limitation for many men is that emotional modeling at home was sometimes limited, especially my generation. I'm 40, so I'm talking about people that grew up in the 80s and 90s, and certainly the generation before, because you may have seen a dad who worked nonstop. He loved through doing, not by telling you so. Or perhaps you just witnessed emotional absence altogether. It just didn't exist. And that meant you learned that love equals responsibility and strength equals silence, and, feelings can be a burden. So the psychologist Ronald Levin, again, speaks about how boys are socialized away from emotional literacy. So as men, when your partner wants vulnerability, they want that closeness, they want that intimacy, it doesn't just feel unfamiliar, it actually feels totally unsafe. And not because you don't care, but because you never saw it, so you can't see it as a familiar behavior. So quite subtly, we stay loyal to the family patterns without realizing. And it's not because they were perfect, but again, it's because they're what we know. So family systems research into these loyalties literally call them invisible loyalties. And breaking the pattern can almost feel like betrayal because it's just so deeply wired into you, even when the pattern of behavior is hurting you. And I've been on this journey, my growth journey, for a good while now. I've been taking baby steps, and I try, um, and I'm covering the distance. And there was definitely a point where doing things differently, I don't know if it felt wrong, but it felt slightly uncomfortable because it was so new. And it took a fair amount of sitting with to understand where that feeling of wrongness came from, the uncomfortable feeling. But I found that when I was being more open, making myself more vulnerable, showing weakness, I felt like I was I was almost shaming the person I was before and telling him he was less than adequate. Um, the values I had learned were wrong, and therefore I was being disloyal. And in truth, perhaps some of that was true, that the values weren't good enough. But the shame came because I had learned a set of values and lived my life with them, which made that old version of Kieran less whole. And that's where this loyalty, this trade off comes in, and all of the topics of shame that I'd taken so long to change, guilt, I'd wasted part of my life and my happiness, even embarrassment that the story I was telling myself wasn't sufficiently robust to be accurate. So there is hope. There's always hope. You're not broken. You're just patterned. You're just trapped a little bit, and patterns can change once you see them and you recognize it's 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 saying things either to yourself or even out loud. Oh, I shut down because that's what I saw, or oh, I over provide because that's how I saw love was provided. And obviously, out loud is very powerful as you're helping everyone around you to understand, but it's not entirely necessary. But at least if you're saying these things to yourself, you're learning. But that's not blame. You're not making excuses. You're starting to show awareness, and awareness will give you such freedom because you can't choose differently until you see what's been choosing for you, if that makes sense. And those strategies that kept you safe as a kid, they might actually be keeping you distant as an adult. So if staying quiet kept the peace when you were younger, it actually now makes you an unknown. If being strong stopped you from being a burden, you're not going to get closeness. So those patterns, arguably, they weren't wrong because they were you felt like they were protecting you, but you're not in that house anymore. You've built your own life under your own roof with your own set of rules. So when you see the patterns, you also start to see what they cost. Things like the closeness that you didn't get, the feelings you weren't able to express, or the version of you that might have been really happy, the happiest version of yourself. And where that kind of leads is that it's now not just an insight. You might be starting to tap into some grief. And most men don't realize like how much of what we how much of what we carry is ungrieved. And that's exactly where we're going to head next. So just ask yourself, what did love look like in your house growing up? Like, who spoke? Who stayed quiet? Who said what? How were emotions handled? And let's be clear, we're not assigning blame. You just need to see the blueprint that you learned the behavior from, because your current relationship might still be living in a house that you moved out years ago. And that's it. That's where we're going to leave today. So, as ever, if this is helping you, if you think it would help other people, certainly subscribe to the channel, like, comment, download, anything, increase the popularity of it so we can get it in front of people. I'm really enjoying guiding you through this. I honestly, I haven't learned so much about myself in such a small period of time as I have since I've been doing the research and the planning for these. It's really liberating for me. I hope it's helping you. And hopefully we all can continue this journey together. So between now and the next episode, I hope you have a good few days, and I wish you the best of luck.